My name is Commander Alex Viper Chen. You're watching Razor Edge. Most people think congressional investigations are independent. That's the biggest lie ever told about American democracy. What I'm about to reveal was classified for over 50 years, and even now, some details remain buried in CIA vaults that may never see daylight. Before we dive into this classified operation, I need to ask you something important. If these untold intelligence stories resonate with you, consider subscribing to Razor Edge and hitting that notification bell. It ensures you never miss our exclusive military and intelligence narratives, and it truly helps us continue exposing these hidden operations. Washington, D.C., March 1975. Agent Sarah Raven Mitchell had spent 15 years in CIA psychological operations, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered in the basement archives of Langley. As a senior analyst specializing in domestic intelligence coordination, Sarah thought she understood the scope of agency operations. She was dead wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah pulled file after file from the restricted section. Operation Mockingbird was supposed to be about foreign propaganda and overseas media manipulation. But buried in subsection 7 Alpha, she found something that made her blood run cold. A typewritten memo dated February 12, 1973. Congressional Investigation Media Response Protocol, Domestic Implementation Phase. But what she discovered in that first document was just the beginning of a conspiracy that would shake her faith in American democracy. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the operational directive. The CIA hadn't just infiltrated foreign media outlets. They had systematically placed assets inside every major American newsroom covering Capitol Hill. The Washington Post, New York Times, CBS News, NBC, all had CIA operatives or paid informants in key editorial positions. The memo outlined specific protocols. When congressional investigations threaten agency operations, activate media assets to redirect narrative focus, discredit key witnesses, or eliminate coverage entirely. Her secure phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor. Mitchell, need you in conference room C immediately. Urgent briefing. Sarah looked at the classified documents spread across her desk. Someone knew she was digging where she shouldn't be. She quickly photographed 3 pages with her secure camera before locking the files away. The walk to conference room C felt like a death march. Every CIA employee she passed seemed to be watching her, evaluating her, measuring her loyalty. Deputy Director Harrison sat at the head of the polished oak table, his steel gray eyes fixed on Sarah as she entered. Agent Mitchell, we understand you've been conducting research in the historical archives. Yes, sir. Standard intelligence assessment protocols for the Church Committee follow-up analysis. Harrison's smile was razor thin. The Church Committee concluded their work months ago. What specific materials were you reviewing? Sarah realized she was walking into a trap that had been set long before she ever entered that basement archive. Operation Mockingbird historical documentation, sir. Ensuring our foreign media protocols remain compartmentalized from domestic operations. Interesting. Harrison opened a manila folder. Because according to our security logs, you accessed subsection 7 Alpha. That's not foreign operations, Agent Mitchell. That's domestic congressional liaison protocols. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Around the table sat 4 other senior operatives, all watching her with the cold calculation of predators evaluating prey. Sir, I may have pulled the wrong classification section. The filing system in archives is somewhat confusing for historical research. But Harrison's next words would reveal just how deep the surveillance state had penetrated American democracy. Agent Mitchell, let me be very clear about something. Operation Mockingbird never ended. It evolved. What you discovered in those files represents ongoing operations critical to national security. Congressional investigations, when improperly conducted, can compromise decades of intelligence work and endanger American assets worldwide. Harrison stood and walked to a wall-mounted map of Washington, D.C. Red pins marked locations throughout the city. Newspaper offices, television studios, congressional office buildings. Every red pin represents a media asset or congressional liaison point. We don't control the news, Agent Mitchell. We guide it. We ensure that investigations focus on appropriate targets and avoid compromising ongoing operations. Sarah's training kicked in. Show no emotion, reveal no reaction. But internally, she was processing the magnitude of what Harrison was admitting. The next revelation would expose how specific senators and representatives had been systematically targeted for destruction. Harrison returned to his seat and opened another folder. Senator William Proxmire, 1975. His investigation into CIA domestic operations was getting too close to our congressional liaison protocols. Within 6 weeks, coordinated media coverage portrayed him as a conspiracy theorist obsessed with minor budget irregularities. He slid a photograph across the table. Representative Bella Abzug, 1976. Her subcommittee was preparing to subpoena Operation Mockingbird personnel files. Suddenly, every major newspaper was running stories about her grandstanding and publicity-seeking behavior. Sarah stared at the photos of politicians she remembered from news coverage. Politicians who had been systematically destroyed by media campaigns she now realized were CIA operations. "How many?" she whispered. "How many what, Agent Mitchell? How many congressional investigations have been neutralized through media manipulation?" Harrison's smile was genuinely terrifying. "All of them that mattered." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Sarah understood she was at a crossroads that would define not just her career, but potentially her survival. "Agent Mitchell, you have 2 choices. You can join the Congressional Liaison Team and help protect American intelligence operations from political interference. Or you can continue your historical research and discover just how thoroughly we monitor our own personnel." But what Sarah didn't know was that her every move had been monitored since the moment she first accessed those classified files. Harrison gestured to one of the other operatives, who activated a small recording device. Sarah's own voice filled the room. The Washington Post, New York Times, CBS News, NBC, all had CIA operatives or paid informants in key editorial positions. Her stomach dropped. They had been listening to her private thoughts as she read the classified documents. The basement archives were completely surveilled. "Advanced audio surveillance, Agent Mitchell. We know every word you read, every document you photographed, every conclusion you reached. The question now is whether you're going to be part of the solution or part of the problem." Sarah looked around the table at faces that showed no mercy, no hesitation, no doubt about their mission. These were intelligence professionals who had spent decades protecting American interests through any means necessary. But her next decision would determine whether she became a guardian of democracy or another casualty of the shadow war. "I want to understand the full scope of operations before I make any commitments," Sarah said carefully. Harrison nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Agent Rodriguez will brief you on current congressional targets and ongoing media coordination protocols. Welcome to the real CIA, Agent Mitchell." As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized she had just been recruited into the most classified domestic operation in American history. An operation that treated the U.S. Congress not as a co-equal branch of government, but as a potential enemy to be monitored, manipulated, and when necessary, neutralized. But what she would discover about the current targets would reveal a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything the Church Committee had ever imagined. The next morning, Agent Rodriguez led Sarah through a maze of corridors she had never seen in 15 years at Langley. They descended 3 levels below the main building, past security checkpoints that required biometric scans Sarah didn't know existed. "Welcome to the Congressional Monitoring Center," Rodriguez said, swiping his badge at a steel door marked only with numbers. "This is where we track every investigation, every subpoena, every closed-door meeting that could impact agency operations." The room beyond was a technological marvel. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time feeds from congressional hearing rooms, while analysts monitored phone intercepts and email traffic from Capitol Hill. But what caught Sarah's attention were the individual workstations, each focused on a specific senator or representative. But what she saw on those screens would reveal the true scope of political surveillance in America. "Station 7 is our current priority," Rodriguez explained, pointing to a workstation where an analyst was reviewing transcripts. "Senator Frank Church's protege, Senator Walter Mondale, has been asking uncomfortable questions about CIA domestic operations." Sarah read over the analyst's shoulder. phone transcripts, meeting schedules, even personal conversations with family members. The surveillance was total and invasive. "How is this legal?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez laughed coldly. "Legal is a flexible concept when national security is at stake. Senator Mondale thinks he's conducting oversight. We're conducting damage control." The next revelation would show her exactly how senators were systematically destroyed through coordinated media campaigns. Rodriguez activated a large wall screen showing a timeline labeled Operation Senate Shield, Target, Mondale. The timeline stretched back 6 months, with detailed entries marking every phase of a sophisticated psychological operation. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering. We monitored all his communications, identified his pressure points, cataloged his political vulnerabilities. Phase 2. Asset activation. We reached out to our media contacts at major newspapers and television networks. The screen displayed a list of names Sarah recognized: prominent journalists, editors, television producers. Each name had a classification: paid asset, ideological ally, or compromised. Phase 3. Narrative deployment. We began feeding our media asset stories about Mondale's grandstanding, his political ambitions, his reckless disregard for national security. But the most chilling part was yet to come: the systematic destruction of a senator's reputation through manufactured scandals. Rodriguez clicked to the next screen. Phase 4. Scandal creation. We identified a minor financial irregularity in Mondale's campaign finances from 1972. Nothing illegal, just a paperwork error. Our assets turned it into a front-page story about ethical lapses and questionable judgment. Sarah watched as newspaper headlines flashed across the screen. Mondale's money problems. Senator's ethical questions. Is Mondale fit for oversight? Within 2 weeks, his approval ratings dropped 15 points. His own party leadership began distancing themselves. The oversight hearings were quietly shelved. Sarah felt sick. "You destroyed a senator's career over a paperwork error?" Rodriguez's answer would reveal the cold calculation behind political assassination through media manipulation. "We neutralized a threat to ongoing operations that protect American lives worldwide. Senator Mondale's investigation would have exposed assets in Moscow, compromised operations in Eastern Europe, and potentially gotten our people killed." Rodriguez pulled up another file. But Mondale was small-time compared to our current primary target. The screen displayed a photograph of Senator Barry Goldwater, the conservative firebrand who had been asking pointed questions about CIA domestic surveillance programs. Goldwater is different. He has credibility with both parties, military experience, and he's not easily intimidated. Traditional scandal creation won't work with him. What they had planned for Goldwater would demonstrate the most sophisticated political destruction operation in CIA history. Operation Desert Storm, not the military operation, that comes later. This is psychological warfare against Goldwater specifically. Rodriguez opened a thick file folder. We've identified 3 vectors of attack. First, his military record. We're going to discover classified documents suggesting he made tactical errors during World War II that cost American lives. Sarah's blood ran cold. "You're going to fabricate military records?" "We're going to recontextualize existing records. Every military commander makes difficult decisions. We're simply going to ensure those decisions are viewed through the lens of incompetence rather than wartime necessity." But the second vector of attack would target Goldwater's family in ways that violated every principle of American democracy. Second vector: family finances. Goldwater's department store business has complex financial arrangements. We're going to leak selective information suggesting tax evasion and unethical business practices. Rodriguez showed Sarah financial documents that had clearly been altered. Numbers changed, dates modified, context removed. Our media assets will run a series of investigative pieces about Goldwater's secret finances and the senator's tax haven empire. By the time his accountants can respond with the full documentation, the narrative will be established. Sarah realized she was witnessing the systematic destruction of American democracy from within. What's the third vector? The final attack vector would reveal the CIA's willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their domestic operations. Personal destruction. We've been monitoring Goldwater's private communications for 8 months. We know about his friendship with journalist Sarah McClendon, his concerns about his wife's health, his doubts about continuing in politics. Rodriguez activated an audio recording. Goldwater's voice filled the room. Sometimes I wonder if this job is worth the toll it takes on Peggy. The stress, the constant attacks, the invasion of our privacy. We're going to leak edited versions of his private conversations, making it appear that he's lost confidence in his own judgment, that he's considering resignation, that he's mentally unstable from the pressure. Sarah felt like she was drowning. You're going to use his private concerns about his wife's health to destroy his political career? But Rodriguez's final revelation would show her that Goldwater was just one target in a much larger operation. Goldwater is Phase 1 of Operation Congressional Reset. We have similar operations planned for 12 senators and 37 representatives who have shown interest in CIA oversight. The wall screen displayed a map of the United States with red pins marking congressional districts. Each pin represented a targeted politician, with detailed psychological profiles and destruction timelines. Senator Church was just the beginning. The Church Committee exposed some of our foreign operations, but they barely scratched the surface of domestic capabilities. We can't allow another comprehensive investigation. Sarah stared at the map, realizing she was looking at a plan to systematically neutralize congressional oversight of the intelligence community. But what she didn't know was that her own reaction was being carefully monitored and evaluated. In the observation room above the Congressional Monitoring Center, Deputy Director Harrison watched Sarah through one-way glass. Her facial expressions, body language, and physiological responses were being analyzed by behavioral specialists. Subject shows appropriate concern, but no signs of moral rebellion, reported Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the CIA's chief psychological profiler. Stress indicators are within acceptable parameters. She's processing the information but not rejecting the mission framework. Harrison nodded. Good. We need operatives who understand the stakes without getting squeamish about the methods. But Sarah's next question would reveal whether she was truly ready to join the shadow war against American democracy. How do we ensure the media assets maintain operational security? Sarah asked Rodriguez. If any of these journalists reveal their CIA connections, the entire operation collapses. Rodriguez smiled approvingly. Excellent question. That's exactly the kind of operational thinking we need. Each media asset is compartmentalized. They don't know about other assets, and they believe their CIA contact is their only government source. He pulled up another screen showing a complex web of relationships. Plus, we have insurance policies. Every asset has been thoroughly backgrounded. We know about their financial problems, their personal indiscretions, their career vulnerabilities. Cooperation is ensured through a combination of financial incentives and subtle coercion. The final revelation of the day would show Sarah exactly how deep the CIA's control over American media had become. Sarah, I want you to understand something crucial. We don't just have assets in media. We have assets who have become media. 3 of our former operatives now hold senior editorial positions at major newspapers. 2 former CIA analysts are now television producers. One of our psychological operations specialists is now a prominent political commentator. Sarah felt the room spinning. The media isn't just compromised. It's been colonized. Now you're beginning to understand the scope of Operation Mockingbird's evolution. We didn't just infiltrate American media. We became American media. But tomorrow, Sarah would discover that congressional manipulation was just one component of a much larger operation to control American democracy itself. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a Georgetown restaurant that looked like any other upscale Washington establishment. But the man sitting across from her represented something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. Agent Mitchell, meet David Atlee Phillips, Rodriguez said quietly. Former Chief of Western Hemisphere Division, current Director of Media Coordination. Phillips was in his early 50s with the kind of unremarkable appearance that made him perfect for covert operations. But his eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had spent decades manipulating information and destroying lives. But what Phillips revealed about his current role would expose the true puppet masters behind American media. Sarah, I understand you're learning about our Congressional Oversight protocols. What Rodriguez may not have explained is that media coordination is just one component of a much larger information architecture. Phillips opened a leather briefcase and removed an organizational chart that made Sarah's blood run cold. At the top, Operation Democracy Shield, Media Integration Protocol. We don't just have assets in newsrooms, we have assets who own newsrooms. We don't just influence editorial decisions, we make editorial decisions. The next revelation would show her exactly how CIA operatives had infiltrated the highest levels of American journalism. Phillips pointed to names on the chart that Sarah recognized as prominent media figures. Katharine Graham at the Washington Post. She's been briefed on agency priorities since 1965. Not compromised, just educated about national security implications of certain stories. Sarah stared at the chart. You're telling me the owner of the Washington Post coordinates with the CIA? I'm telling you that patriotic Americans in media leadership understand that some stories serve enemy interests. Mrs. Graham has killed 17 stories that would have compromised ongoing operations. Phillips flipped to another page showing television network executives. CBS, NBC, ABC, we have regular briefings with news directors. Not control, Sarah, guidance. We help them understand which stories serve American interests and which stories serve Soviet interests. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come: the systematic placement of CIA operatives in key editorial positions. However, guidance isn't always sufficient. Sometimes we need direct editorial control. Phillips showed her another chart labeled Deep Cover Media Assets, Editorial Level. Sarah read names she recognized from newspaper mastheads and television credits. Senior editors, producers, news directors, all former CIA operatives who had transitioned into media careers while maintaining their intelligence connections. Carl Bernstein is getting close to exposing some of this in his Washington Post investigation. We're going to have to neutralize that story before it goes to print. Sarah felt sick. Bernstein is investigating CIA media infiltration? Phillips's answer would reveal how the agency planned to destroy one of America's most respected investigative journalists. Bernstein thinks he's found evidence of CIA media manipulation. He has no idea how deep this goes. His story focuses on foreign operations and overseas propaganda. He doesn't know about domestic congressional coordination. Phillips opened another file. But we can't let even a partial exposure go to print. We're going to discredit Bernstein through his own newspaper. Sarah watched as Phillips laid out a sophisticated character assassination plan. We've identified sources for Bernstein's story, former CIA operatives who were supposed to remain classified. We're going to leak information suggesting these sources are Soviet agents feeding disinformation to American journalists. You're going to make it look like Bernstein is working with Soviet intelligence? We're going to make it look like Bernstein has been manipulated by Soviet intelligence. Big difference. He remains a patriotic American who was deceived by enemy operatives. But the operation against Bernstein would demonstrate the CIA's ability to manipulate even the most sophisticated newsrooms. Phillips activated a small recording device. This is a conversation between Bernstein and one of his sources, recorded 3 days ago. Sarah heard Bernstein's voice discussing CIA media operations with someone who was clearly a former intelligence operative. But as she listened, she realized the source was feeding Bernstein information that was technically accurate but strategically misleading. The source is one of ours, Phillips explained. Former CIA but still on the payroll as a consultant. He's giving Bernstein real information about foreign media operations while steering him away from domestic congressional coordination. Sarah understood the sophisticated deception. So when Bernstein publishes his story, it will expose operations you want exposed while protecting operations you want protected. Exactly. And when the exposed operations are revealed to be less significant than Bernstein claimed, his credibility will be damaged. Future investigations will be viewed with skepticism. The next phase of the operation would show how the CIA controlled narrative, even within the newsrooms investigating them. Phillips showed Sarah internal Washington Post memos discussing Bernstein's investigation. These are from Katharine Graham's office. She's been briefed on the national security implications of Bernstein's story. Sarah read the memos with growing horror. Graham was coordinating with CIA officials to limit the scope of Bernstein's investigation while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism. Mrs. Graham believes she's protecting national security. She doesn't realize she's protecting CIA domestic operations that have nothing to do with foreign threats. Phillips pulled up another document. But the most elegant part of this operation is that Bernstein himself doesn't know his story is being managed. He thinks he's conducting independent investigative journalism. But what Sarah discovered next would reveal that media manipulation was just one component of a much larger psychological operation. Sarah, I want you to understand something crucial about information warfare. We don't just control what people read in newspapers or see on television. We control what people think about what they read and see. Phillips opened a thick manual labeled Psychological Operations, Domestic Implementation. Sarah had never seen anything like it. Every story we allow to be published serves multiple purposes. Bernstein's story will actually strengthen our position by making the public believe CIA media operations are limited to foreign propaganda. Sarah flipped through pages of psychological profiles, public opinion research, and manipulation techniques. You're conducting psychological operations against the American public? We're conducting psychological operations to protect the American public from Soviet psychological operations. There's a difference. But Phillips's final revelation would show her that the CIA had moved far beyond simple media manipulation. The media coordination is just the foundation, Sarah. The real operation is congressional neutralization through manufactured public opinion. Phillips activated a wall screen showing polling data from across the country. Every congressman who threatens CIA operations sees their approval ratings mysteriously decline. Every senator who asks uncomfortable questions suddenly faces media scrutiny about unrelated issues. Sarah stared at the data. You're manipulating public opinion to control congressional elections? We're ensuring that congressmen who understand national security priorities remain in office, while congressmen who threaten ongoing operations face appropriate political consequences. Phillips showed her detailed files on dozens of congressional races. Representative Otis Pike's investigation into CIA domestic surveillance, his approval ratings dropped 23 points after our media assets began covering his reckless grandstanding. But the most chilling revelation was that this operation extended far beyond individual politicians. Sarah, we're not just targeting individual congressmen. We're reshaping the entire political landscape to ensure permanent protection for intelligence operations. Phillips pulled up a map of the United States with congressional districts color-coded by their Security Cooperation Index. Red districts had congressmen who supported expanded CIA authority. Blue districts had congressmen who supported oversight and restrictions. Over the next decade, we're going to systematically flip blue districts to red through coordinated media campaigns, opposition research, and strategic scandal deployment. Sarah realized she was looking at a plan to fundamentally alter American democracy. You're trying to create a Congress that will never question CIA operations? We're trying to create a Congress that understands the realities of the Cold War and the necessity of robust intelligence capabilities. But what Sarah didn't know was that her own psychological profile was being updated in real time based on her reactions. In the CIA's Behavioral Analysis Center, Dr. Kane was reviewing Sarah's stress indicators and emotional responses. Subject shows appropriate concern about operational scope, but no signs of moral rejection. She's asking tactical questions rather than ethical questions. Deputy Director Harrison reviewed the data. Good. She's thinking like an intelligence professional rather than a civilian. Continue the briefing process. But Sarah's next question would reveal whether she was ready for the final phase of her recruitment. What happens to journalists who refuse to cooperate with media coordination protocols? Sarah asked Phillips. Phillips's smile was genuinely terrifying. That's an excellent operational question, Sarah. And it brings us to tomorrow's briefing topic, consequence management for non-cooperative media assets. He closed his briefcase and stood to leave. Some journalists understand that national security requires certain accommodations. Others need more persuasive encouragement. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of encouragement? Phillips's final words would preview the darkest aspects of CIA domestic operations. Financial pressure, career destruction, personal scandal, family safety concerns. We have a full spectrum of persuasion techniques. Most journalists cooperate after the first gentle reminder about their vulnerabilities. As Phillips walked away, Sarah realized she had crossed another line in her recruitment. She was no longer learning about CIA operations. She was being prepared to participate in them. But tomorrow's briefing would reveal operations so dark that even seasoned intelligence professionals questioned their necessity. The next morning, Sarah was escorted to a section of Langley she didn't know existed. 5 levels underground, past security checkpoints that required DNA verification, lay the CIA's most classified domestic operations center. "Welcome to the Congressional Neutralization Command," said Deputy Director Harrison, leading Sarah through corridors lined with soundproof doors. "This is where we coordinate our most sensitive political operations." The main operations room was a technological marvel that rivaled NASA's mission control. Dozens of analysts monitored real-time intelligence feeds from every congressional office building, while massive screens displayed the status of ongoing political operations across the country. But what Sarah saw on those screens would reveal the true scope of CIA interference in American democracy. "Operation Senate Shield is entering its final phase," Harrison explained, pointing to a central display showing Senator Barry Goldwater's office. "The senator has called for closed hearings on CIA domestic surveillance. We cannot allow those hearings to proceed." Sarah watched as analysts tracked every phone call, every meeting, every piece of correspondence flowing in and out of Goldwater's office. The surveillance was total and invasive. "How are you going to stop a sitting senator from conducting oversight hearings?" Sarah asked. Harrison's smile was cold as winter. "We're not going to stop him, Sarah. We're going to make him stop himself." The operation, Harrison revealed, would demonstrate the CIA's ability to manipulate congressional proceedings from within. "Senator Goldwater's chief of staff, Robert Novak, has been on our payroll for 18 months, Harrison explained, activating a secure communication channel. "He doesn't know he's working for us. He believes he's providing information to a Pentagon liaison office." Sarah watched as Harrison typed a message. "Goldwater planning domestic surveillance hearings. Need complete witness list and evidence inventory." Within minutes, a response appeared. "Witness list attached. Evidence includes Operation Chaos files, Mockingbird documentation, congressional surveillance protocols, hearings scheduled for next Tuesday. Novak thinks he's helping coordinate Pentagon testimony. He's actually giving us complete intelligence on Goldwater's investigation." But the next phase of the operation would show how the CIA planned to sabotage the hearings from within Congress itself. Harrison led Sarah to another workstation where an analyst was reviewing congressional schedules. Phase 2, Witness Neutralization. Every witness Goldwater plans to call has been thoroughly backgrounded. We know their vulnerabilities, their pressure points, their secrets. The analyst pulled up files on former CIA operatives who were scheduled to testify about domestic surveillance programs. Each file contained detailed psychological profiles and leverage assessments. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was planning to testify about MK-Ultra domestic applications. Yesterday, he received a phone call informing him that his daughter's college admission could be reconsidered if he testified inaccurately about classified programs. Sarah felt sick. "You're threatening witnesses' families?" "We're reminding witnesses about the consequences of revealing information that could endanger ongoing operations and American lives." The most chilling revelation was how the CIA planned to manipulate the hearings themselves. Harrison activated another screen showing the congressional hearing room where Goldwater's Oversight Committee would meet. "We've had surveillance equipment installed in that room for 6 years. Every private conversation, every strategy session, every confidential discussion is monitored and recorded." Sarah watched real-time feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the hearing room. "You're spying on congressional oversight committees?" "We're monitoring potential security breaches during discussions of classified materials. But the intelligence also allows us to anticipate questions and prepare appropriate responses." Harrison showed her transcripts of private conversations between committee members discussing their investigation strategy. "Senator Goldwater plans to focus on domestic surveillance of American citizens. We're going to redirect his attention to foreign operations that are already partially declassified. But the operation's next phase would reveal how deeply the CIA had penetrated congressional staff. Sarah, I want you to understand something crucial about congressional oversight. Every committee has staff members who understand that some investigations serve enemy interests. Harrison pulled up an organizational chart of Goldwater's Oversight Committee. Red marks indicated staff members who were providing intelligence to the CIA. The committee's chief counsel, the senior investigator, and 2 research analysts are all providing us with real-time intelligence on the investigation's progress. They don't know about each other, and they believe they're protecting national security. Sarah stared at the chart. You've infiltrated the Oversight Committee that's supposed to be investigating you. We've ensured that patriotic Americans in key positions understand the national security implications of certain lines of inquiry. The most sophisticated part of the operation involved manipulating the evidence itself. Harrison led Sarah to a secure vault where CIA archivists were preparing documents for congressional review. When Congress subpoenas classified materials, we provide them with carefully curated selections that tell the story we want told. Sarah watched as archivists sorted through thousands of documents, separating them into categories: safe for release, redact and release, and substitute documentation. The documents Congress receives are technically authentic, but they represent a carefully constructed narrative that protects ongoing operations while appearing to provide full disclosure. An archivist showed Sarah 2 versions of the same operational report. The original detailed domestic surveillance of American citizens. The version prepared for Congress focused on foreign intelligence gathering, with domestic surveillance mentioned only in passing. But what Sarah discovered next would reveal that document manipulation was just one component of a much larger deception. The most elegant part of our congressional management protocol is that we actually help committees conduct successful investigations, Harrison explained. We provide them with genuine intelligence about operations we want exposed. Harrison showed Sarah a list of CIA operations that were being deliberately revealed to Congress. These are foreign operations that have already been compromised, domestic programs that have outlived their usefulness, or activities that make us appear more limited in scope than we actually are. Sarah understood the sophisticated deception. You're controlling what Congress discovers by feeding them real information about operations that don't matter while hiding operations that do matter. Exactly. Congressional oversight becomes a form of controlled disclosure that actually strengthens our position by making the public believe they know the full scope of our activities. But the final phase of the operation would demonstrate the CIA's ability to manipulate congressional conclusions. Harrison activated a communication channel to the committee's chief counsel. This is how we ensure appropriate conclusions from congressional investigations. Sarah watched as Harrison typed, Pentagon liaison recommends focusing final report on foreign operations oversight rather than domestic surveillance capabilities. Domestic programs appear to be limited in scope and properly supervised. The response came quickly. Understood. We'll draft recommendations emphasizing foreign intelligence oversight and congressional notification protocols. The chief counsel believes he's coordinating with Pentagon officials to ensure appropriate military input on intelligence oversight. He doesn't realize he's implementing CIA guidance on congressional conclusions. But what Sarah didn't know was that her own role in these operations was about to be defined. Harrison turned to face Sarah directly. Agent Mitchell, you've now seen the full scope of our congressional management protocols. The question is whether you're ready to take operational responsibility for maintaining these systems. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Everything she had learned over the past week had led to this decision point. What would my specific responsibilities be? Harrison smiled approvingly. Excellent question. You would become the primary liaison between our congressional monitoring systems and our media coordination protocols. When congressional investigations threaten sensitive operations, you would coordinate the appropriate media response. But Harrison's next words would reveal the true scope of Sarah's potential role in the shadow war. Sarah, you would essentially become the guardian of American democracy by ensuring that congressional oversight serves national security rather than enemy interests. Harrison showed her a desk in the operations center with multiple secure communication systems. From this position, you would monitor congressional investigations in real time, coordinate with media assets to shape public perception, and ensure that oversight committees reach appropriate conclusions. Sarah stared at the workstation that would make her a central figure in the CIA's domestic political operations. How many people know about the full scope of these operations? Including you, 17 people have complete knowledge of our congressional management protocols. You would be the 18th. But Sarah's final question would determine whether she was ready to join the most classified domestic operation in American history. What happens to congressional investigations that can't be managed through these protocols? Sarah asked. Harrison's expression became deadly serious. That's tomorrow's briefing topic, Sarah. Sometimes congressional oversight requires more direct intervention. As Sarah left the Congressional Neutralization Command, she realized she was no longer an outside observer learning about CIA operations. She was being prepared to become a key operative in the systematic manipulation of American democracy. But tomorrow's briefing would reveal operations so extreme that they challenged everything she thought she knew about the limits of intelligence work. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell sat in her assigned workstation at the Congressional Neutralization Command, monitoring real-time intelligence feeds from Capitol Hill. She had become exactly what the CIA intended, a guardian of their shadow operations against American democracy. But on this gray December morning, everything changed. Her secure terminal chimed with an urgent message from Deputy Director Harrison. Priority Alpha Alert. Senator Church requesting classified briefing on Operation Mockingbird domestic applications. Immediate response required. Sarah's blood ran cold. Senator Frank Church had been quiet since his committee's investigation concluded months earlier. If he was requesting new briefings, it meant he had discovered something the CIA thought was buried forever. But what Sarah discovered in Church's request would expose the one operation too dangerous for even the CIA to acknowledge. Sarah pulled up Church's formal request to the CIA director. As she read the document, her hands began to tremble. Church wasn't asking about media manipulation or congressional surveillance. He was asking about Operation Democracy Shield, the CIA's systematic plan to reshape American elections through coordinated psychological operations. Agent Mitchell, report to Conference Room Alpha immediately, came Harrison's voice over the secure intercom. Sarah walked through the underground corridors knowing this was different from her previous briefings. The urgency in Harrison's voice, the priority Alpha classification, the fact that she was being called away from her monitoring station. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. The scene in Conference Room Alpha would reveal the CIA's greatest fear, total exposure of their domestic operations. Harrison stood at the head of the table with 5 other senior operatives Sarah had never seen before. Their faces showed the kind of tension that came with existential threats to the agency's survival. Agent Mitchell, Senator Church has obtained classified documents that were supposed to have been destroyed in 1973, Harrison said without preamble. Someone inside this organization has been feeding him intelligence about our most sensitive domestic operations. Sarah felt the room's atmosphere shift. These weren't routine congressional management protocols. This was a counterintelligence crisis. What documents? Sarah asked. Harrison activated a secure screen showing photocopies of CIA internal memos. Sarah recognized the classification markings, but the content made her stomach drop. The documents Church had obtained would expose the true scope of CIA control over American democracy. Operation Democracy Shield. Phase 3. Electoral Manipulation Protocol. Sarah read aloud. Systematic coordination with state election officials to ensure security-conscious candidates receive appropriate support. Harrison nodded grimly. Church has documentation proving we've been coordinating with election officials in 12 states to influence congressional races. Not vote manipulation, but strategic information sharing about candidates' national security positions. Sarah continued reading. The documents detailed how the CIA had provided state officials with security assessments of congressional candidates, effectively labeling oversight-friendly politicians as security risks. How did Church get these documents? They were supposed to be destroyed. Harrison's answer would reveal the existence of a resistance movement within the CIA itself. We have a mole, Sarah. Someone with access to the most classified domestic operations has been systematically copying documents and feeding them to congressional investigators. Harrison showed her a timeline of leaked documents dating back 8 months. The leak started shortly after you joined the Congressional Neutralization Command. Every document Church has obtained deals with operations you've had access to. Sarah felt the accusation hanging in the air like a loaded weapon. You think I'm the mole. We think someone is using your access credentials to copy classified materials. Either you're the leak, or someone has compromised your security protocols. But the next revelation would show Sarah that the mole had exposed operations far beyond anything she had imagined. One of the senior operatives Sarah didn't recognize stepped forward. Agent Mitchell, I'm Director of Internal Security. The leaked documents don't just expose congressional manipulation. They expose the full scope of Operation Democracy Shield. He activated another screen showing documents Sarah had never seen. Phase 4, Judicial Coordination. Phase 5, Executive Branch Integration. Phase 6, Permanent Security State Implementation. Sarah stared at the documents with growing horror. The CIA hadn't just been manipulating Congress and media. They had been working to coordinate with federal judges to ensure security-friendly legal interpretations, with executive branch officials to expand intelligence authorities, and with state governments to create a permanent surveillance infrastructure. You've been building a shadow government, Sarah whispered. The Director of Internal Security's response would reveal the CIA's ultimate justification for subverting American democracy. We've been building the infrastructure necessary to protect American democracy from Soviet infiltration and domestic subversion. Every operation you've seen serves that ultimate purpose. He showed her intelligence reports about Soviet attempts to influence American elections, infiltrate congressional staff, and manipulate media coverage. The Soviets have been conducting psychological operations against American democracy for decades. We've been conducting counter-psychological operations. Sarah understood the logic, but the scope was overwhelming. So you decided to control American democracy to protect it from Soviet control. We decided to ensure that American democracy serves American interests rather than Soviet interests. But what Sarah learned next would reveal that Church's investigation threatened to expose ongoing operations that could trigger a constitutional crisis. Harrison pulled up current operational status reports. Senator Church's investigation isn't just about historical operations. He's discovered that Operation Democracy Shield is still active. Sarah watched real-time intelligence feeds showing CIA coordination with election officials in 6 states where congressional races could affect intelligence oversight. You're still manipulating elections? We're still providing security assessments to ensure that congressmen who understand national security realities remain in positions of oversight authority. Harrison showed her detailed files on congressional candidates in upcoming elections. Every candidate who supports expanded CIA oversight has been assessed as a potential security risk. Every candidate who supports robust intelligence capabilities has been assessed as security conscious. But the most chilling revelation was that Church's investigation had discovered the CIA's plans for permanent political control. Sarah, Church has obtained documents outlining Phase 7 of Operation Democracy Shield, constitutional integration. Harrison showed her planning documents that made her blood run cold. The CIA had been developing protocols for constitutional amendments that would formalize intelligence community authority over national security matters, effectively creating legal frameworks for permanent surveillance and political monitoring. You're planning to change the Constitution? We're planning to ensure that future constitutional interpretations recognize the realities of modern intelligence requirements. Sarah realized she was looking at documents that outlined the systematic transformation of American democracy into a security state with constitutional protections for intelligence operations. But Sarah's next discovery would reveal that she had been chosen for this briefing for a very specific reason. Agent Mitchell, Senator Church has requested a private meeting with you specifically, Harrison said. He believes you have information about current CIA domestic operations that could complete his investigation. Sarah felt the trap closing around her. How does Church know I exist? Someone has been feeding him intelligence about our personnel structure. He knows you're the primary liaison for congressional monitoring and media coordination. Harrison showed her a message from Church's office requesting a classified briefing with Agent S. Mitchell regarding ongoing domestic surveillance coordination protocols. Church knows your name, your position, and your operational responsibilities. The question is whether you're going to that meeting as a CIA operative or as a congressional witness. The final revelation would force Sarah to choose between her loyalty to the CIA and her loyalty to American democracy. "Sarah, I want you to understand your options clearly," Harrison said. "You can meet with Church and provide him with carefully prepared information that protects ongoing operations while appearing to cooperate with his investigation." Harrison handed her a thick briefing folder. "Or you can refuse to meet with Church and face potential congressional subpoena, which would force us to invoke executive privilege and create a constitutional crisis." Sarah opened the folder and found detailed scripts for her potential testimony, carefully crafted to reveal historical operations while protecting current activities. "What if I told Church the truth about everything I've seen?" Harrison's smile was genuinely terrifying. "Then you would discover that the CIA has very effective protocols for protecting national security from internal threats." But Sarah's final decision would determine not just her own fate, but the future of American democracy itself. As Sarah sat in the conference room holding documents that could expose the systematic subversion of American government, she realized she had become the focal point of a battle between intelligence professionals who believed they were protecting democracy and congressional investigators who believed they were saving it. The secure phone on the table rang. Harrison answered and listened for 30 seconds before hanging up. "Senator Church is waiting for your answer, Agent Mitchell. Will you meet with him tomorrow to discuss your knowledge of CIA domestic operations?" Sarah looked around the table at faces that showed no mercy, no hesitation, no doubt about their mission. These were intelligence professionals who had spent decades convinced they were saving America by controlling it. But her answer would determine whether Operation Mockingbird's evolution into total information control would continue, or whether American democracy would finally learn the truth about the shadow war being fought in its name. "I'll meet with Senator Church," Sarah said quietly. "But I'll be telling him everything." The silence in the room was deafening. Harrison's expression never changed, but Sarah could see the calculations running behind his eyes. "Agent Mitchell, I hope you understand the implications of that decision for national security, for ongoing operations, and for your own future." Sarah stood to leave, knowing she had just declared war on the most powerful intelligence organization in American history. But as she walked toward the door, Harrison's final words would reveal that the CIA had been prepared for this possibility all along. "Sarah, before you leave, there's one more thing you should know. Senator Church's investigation will conclude next month regardless of what you tell him. The congressional leadership has already been briefed on the national security implications of continued CIA oversight." Sarah turned back to face Harrison. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that American democracy has already chosen security over transparency. Your testimony will be noted, filed, and forgotten. Operation Democracy Shield will continue under different names with different personnel." And as Sarah left the Congressional Neutralization Command for the last time, she realized that the battle for American democracy had been lost long before she ever discovered it was being fought. 3 weeks later, Senator Church's final report on CIA domestic operations was released with heavy redactions. The report concluded that while historical abuses had occurred, current oversight mechanisms were adequate to prevent future violations. Sarah Mitchell's testimony was classified and sealed for 50 years. Operation Democracy Shield continued under the name National Security Coordination Protocol, and the American people never learned how close their democracy had come to complete intelligence community control. The price of truth, Sarah discovered, was higher than anyone was willing to pay.